4th grade. Today we're going to be working on lesson 13-3, tenths and hundredths as fractions and decimals. So yesterday we worked on writing tenths and hundredths. So we know that 3 tenths is equivalent to 30 hundredths. Well, I can write both of those numbers as decimals also. This would be 3 tenths and this would be 30 hundredths. Notice my decimal point comes before the 3 in both of those. This is read 3 tenths, this is read 3 tenths. This is read 30 hundredths, this is read 30 hundredths. Okay, so in a place value chart, we find the tenths and hundredths after the ones place. So here's the ones place, then there's a decimal point. Then we have tenths and hundredths. Okay, the tenths are like dimes, and the hundredths are like pennies, and the ones are like $1 bills. Okay, so these digits that come after the decimal point are less than 1. So if I have this number right here, that would be read as 12 hundredths. I don't say the 0. I would just say 12 hundredths. I read it as a regular number, like I would just read 12, but I say the name of the place that the last digit is in. Okay, if I write this number, that is read as 4 tenths. Okay, let's look at 12 hundredths again. I can write it as a decimal, and I can write it as a fraction. Both of those say 12 hundredths. This is 4 tenths. I can also write it as a fraction, 4 tenths. It's the same thing as this. I read them both as 4 tenths. So let's look in your book on 203. Okay, it asks you to write the fraction as a decimal. So 5 tenths is the fraction. Well, to write a decimal that says 5 tenths, you have to put a 0 in the ones place and then a 5 in the tenths place. You don't have any hundredths, so it would be written just like that, 5 tenths. Number 2 asks you to write 4 hundredths as a decimal. Okay, as a fraction, it's written 4 over 100. Okay. But as a decimal, we would put 0 in the ones place and then the decimal point. Okay, we don't have any tenths, so I'd put a 0 and then a 4 in the hundredths place. So that's how you would write 4 hundredths as a decimal, just like that. And then number 3 says 46 hundredths. So to write 46 hundredths as a decimal, I put a 0 in the ones place, a 4 in the tenths place, and a 6 in the hundredths place. And that says 46 hundredths. Now 204 is the page that you need to do. So on 204, they give you a fraction, and you just have to write it as a decimal. So number 1 says 9 hundredths. So you're going to just put a 0 in the ones place, and then a 9 in the hundredths place. Okay, and then you have to put a 0 in the tenths place because you don't have any tenths. So 9 100ths equals 9 100ths. Those both are the same number. Okay, number 2 says 55 hundredths. Okay, so you would put a 0 in the ones place, your decimal point, and a 5 in the tenths place, and a 5 in the hundredths place. So that would be 55 hundredths. Okay, and let's look down at number 5. Number 5 says 9 tenths. Okay, 9 tenths. So you're going to put a 0 in the ones place and a 9 in the tenths place. You're not going to have anything in the hundredths place, just a 9 in the tenths place. Okay, and then the next part, 13 through 16, it says write each decimal as a fraction. So let's look at number 13, and we have this decimal right here. So let's put these in our place value. So there's a 0 in the ones place, a 0 in the tenths place, and an 8 in the hundredths place. So I would read that as 8 hundredths because the 8 is in the hundredths place. So that equals 8 hundredths. That's the fraction that you need to write. Okay, let's look at number 14. It also has an 8. But notice that the 8 is right after the decimal point. So the 8 is going to be in the tenths place, like that. So this equals 8 tenths. All right, so go ahead and finish this page, numbers 1 through 21. Actually, let's do one more. Let's do number 17. It says, write each value as a fraction and a decimal. So it says 5/10. So first you're going to write it as a fraction, just 5/10. And then you write it as a decimal. That's how you write it as a decimal. Okay, so that's what you have to do in 18 and 19 also. And then answer the question about Garrett on number 20, and answer the question about Amelia on number 21 on page 204.